My name is Vivienne Okafor Marsh. I am 43 years old, and the man standing at the head of that table just told 22 people that my dead husband had concerns about how I managed our money. The room is the Marsh family home in Madison, Alabama. It is a Sunday in October, 3 weeks after Conrad died. The table is the same table where Conrad and I ate Christmas dinner for 11 years, the same table where his mother Bet made the sweet tea that Conrad said was the only sweet tea in Alabama worth drinking. The same table where his father Walter carved the turkey every year with the same electric knife he has used since 1987, and which makes a sound like a small aircraft engine winding down. Walter is still talking. He has a glass of iced tea and he is using the words concerns and final weeks and financial management, and every one of those words is landing in this room the way a structural failure lands, not all at once, but in a sequence, each one making the next one worse. There are 22 people in this room. Conrad's aunts and cousins and his childhood friends and the pastor from their family church. People who have known the Marsh family for 40 years and have known me for 11 and are now looking at Walter with the particular attention of people who are receiving new information about someone they thought they knew. I am standing near the kitchen doorway holding a plate of cornbread I was bringing from the kitchen. The plate is warm. My hands are completely still. Dr. Anita Rowe she found my eyes the moment Walter started speaking. She has not looked away. But here is what none of them knew. 13 months before that Sunday, Conrad had called me from his hospital room when his parents were not there, and I had recorded that conversation, and in it he told me exactly what he wanted, and exactly who he trusted, and exactly what he was afraid of. And it was not me. This is how it happened. Welcome back to my channel, where we share real-life stories about family justice, quiet strength, and the moments that change everything. If this is your first time here, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. To understand what happened in that room on that Sunday, and what happened in an Alabama probate courtroom 13 months, you have to understand what it means to lose a husband and discover, in the same season, that the people who were supposed to grieve with you had been building something against you the entire time. I design the parts of spacecraft that cannot fail. That is the simplest way to describe what structural analysis means in aerospace engineering. I calculate the loads and stresses on critical I identify the points of potential failure, and I build the mathematical case for why the structure will hold under conditions that would destroy almost anything else. I have been doing this at Redstone Arsenal's contractor network in Huntsville for 16 years. I have worked on components that are currently in orbit. I find this neither romantic nor surprising. It is the work. You do it correctly, or you do not do it. I met Conrad in 2009 at a conference in Atlanta. He was a civil engineer, bridges and overpasses, the ground-level version of what I did in the sky. We argued for 40 minutes about load distribution methodologies before either of us introduced ourselves. I married him 14 months later. That is the accurate summary of Conrad Marsh, and we built a life in Huntsville that was, by the standards of most measurements, good, a house on Arbor Creek Drive, that we spent 4 years renovating, slowly the way engineers renovate things correctly and without shortcuts. A joint financial picture that by 2020 included $1.1 million in combined assets. The house, 2 investment accounts, a retirement and a savings account we called the main fund because we had been planning a summer there for 3 years and had not yet gone. We never went to Maine. Conrad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March 2 years ago. Stage 3. The oncologist at Huntsville Hospital was direct in the way that good oncologists are direct. Here is what we know. Here is what we do not know. Here is the rain. Conrad listened to everything. He asked precise questions the way engineers ask questions. What are the tolerances? What are the variables? What does the data actually support? I sat beside him and held his hand and did not cry in that office, because Conrad needed me to be the person who held the data with him rather than the person who fell apart, and I could be that person in that room. And I was. Walter and Bette Marsh drove from Madison to Huntsville the following weekend. Walter is 71. He is a retired insurance adjuster who has spent his life calculating risk in the particular way of someone who believes that risk, properly managed, can always be contained. He does not believe this is a metaphor. He believes it is a life. Conrad loved his father with the particular love of a son who has spent his adult life gently disagreeing with everything his father believes while remaining genuinely fond of the man who believes it. Bette is 68. She is warm and absolute, the kind of woman who loves fiercely and completely, and whose love has a shape that does not always accommodate the person being loved. She loved Conrad in a way that had no room in it for the idea that Conrad had built a complete life that did not require her management. She had been managing Conrad's comfort since he was born, and a cancer diagnosis was, to Bette, not a reason to stop. I had managed my relationship with Walter and Bette for 11 years with the particular careful navigation of a woman who understands load distribution. I gave them what they needed. I maintained what Conrad needed. I kept the structure functional. When Conrad got sick, I made a mistake. I let them in further than I should have. I told myself it was generosity, they were his parents. He was dying. They needed to be close to him, and I needed help with the practical enormity of serious illness. I told myself the access I gave them was temporary and manageable. I was wrong about manageable. By June, 3 months after the diagnosis, Walter was attending every oncology appointment. By August, he had introduced a second opinion oncologist he had found through a fraternity contact without consulting me or Conrad's primary team. By October, he was calling the hospital directly to ask about Conrad's care, which the nursing staff told me about because I was listed as next of kin, and they were required to notify me. I talked to Conrad about this. I said I was concerned about the boundary erosion. Conrad said his father was scared and meant well. I said I knew both of those things were true, and I was still concerned. Conrad said, "Give him a little more time. He doesn't know what to do with this." I gave him. That is the mistake I have to sit with. I gave Walter and Bette more time and more access because Conrad asked me to, and because I love Conrad, and because I thought love and good judgment were the same thing. They are not the same thing. I know this now. The Redstone Arsenal contractor office where I work smells like the particular combination of filtered air and electronics, and the faint industrial smell that comes from proximity to testing facilities. My desk has 2 monitors and a structural analysis software suite, and a photograph of Conrad at the top of a ridge in the Smoky Mountains from 2017, squinting into the sun, holding a water bottle, looking exactly like himself. I have not moved that photograph since he died. I look at it when I am working through something difficult. It does not solve anything. It is just accurate. Anita Rowe has the office next to mine. We have been colleagues for 11 years and friends for 9, and she is the kind of person who combines genuine intellectual rigor with the particular warmth of someone who has decided that the people she cares about will know it without ambiguity. She brought food to my house every week for the 8 months Conrad was sick. Not occasionally. Every week. Without being asked. Without making it a thing that required acknowledgement. She just did it. When Conrad died on a Wednesday morning in September, I called her before I called anyone else except his parents. She arrived at my house within the hour. She did not say anything when I opened the door. She came in and sat with me, and that was sufficient. The gathering at the Marsh family home in Madison was a Sunday in October, 3 weeks after Conrad's funeral. Bette had organized it, a family gathering for close relatives and longtime friends, a chance to be together in the house, to share food and memories, to do the collective thing that families do in the weeks after loss. I drove from Huntsville to Madison, which is 40 minutes on a clear day. The October drive is beautiful in northern Alabama, the trees doing what they do. The sky the particular blue of October mornings that feels like something the season saved specifically for this month. I drove with the radio off. I had been driving with the radio off since September. The house was full when I arrived. 22 people by my count, which I made automatically because I count things. It is what I do. Conrad's aunts, Linda and Patricia from Decatur. His cousin Marcus with his wife and 2 daughters. 3 men Conrad had known since middle school. The pastor from First Baptist Madison. Neighbors who had brought food. People who had known the Marsh family for 40 years. I knew most of them. I had spent 11 years at this table. I was, to the best of my understanding, part of this family. The food was on the kitchen counter and the dining room table, and I was helping bring things from the kitchen, the cornbread that Bet makes in a cast-iron skillet, the same skillet she had used since before Conrad was born, which makes a cornbread with a crust that I have tried to replicate in my own kitchen for 11 years and have never quite achieved. I was carrying a plate of it from the kitchen when Walter began speaking. He was standing at the head of the dining room table with his iced tea. He was addressing no one specifically and everyone generally, the way he addresses rooms when he has decided something needs to be said. He said he wanted to share something Conrad had told him in his final weeks. He said Conrad had expressed concerns. He said the concerns were about financial management. He said Conrad had been worried about certain decisions and had spoken to Walter about them privately. He used the phrase as the head of this family now. I registered that phrase and set it aside, and looked at Walter and held the plate of cornbread and did not move. 22 people were listening. I could see their faces from the kitchen doorway. I could see the moment of recalibration happening in real time, the small adjustments people make when they receive information that changes the shape of something they thought they understood. Conrad's Aunt Linda looked at me briefly, and then looked at her plate. Pastor Williams looked at Walter with the expression of a man who is deciding how much of this he believes. Anita was across the room. She had come because I had asked her to come. I did not want to be alone in that house for the first time since Conrad died. She was holding a glass of sweet tea, and she had found my eyes the moment Walter started speaking, and she did not look away. I looked back at her. I did not move. I set the cornbread plate on the nearest flat surface, which was the end of the dining room table, carefully, without sound. Walter finished speaking. Someone murmured something affirming. The room began to move again. I went back into the kitchen. I stood at the kitchen counter where I had stood 11 years of Sunday dinners, and I looked at the cast-iron skillet still on the stove, and I thought about Conrad at this table every Christmas. I thought about the electric knife that sounded like a small aircraft engine winding down. I thought about the phrase as the head of this family now. Then, I thought about the phone call. 2 months before Conrad died, on a Tuesday evening in July when Walter and Bet had gone to get dinner and Conrad and I were alone in his hospital room, he had called me on my cell phone, even though I was sitting in the chair beside his bed. He said, "I want you to record this." I looked at him. He said, "I know what they've been saying. I want there to be a record." I opened the voice memo app on my phone. I pressed record. He talked for 14 minutes. Standing in Bet's kitchen with the cast-iron skillet on the stove and 22 people in the next room, I thought about those 14 minutes. Then I went back to the dining room and I found Anita, and I said, very quietly, "I need to talk to you on the drive home." She nodded once. I stayed for 2 more hours. I ate food. I spoke to the people who spoke to me. I told Conrad's Aunt Linda that yes, the cornbread was as good as always, because it was, and because Linda had asked, and because telling the truth about cornbread was something I could do. I drove home at 4:30. Anita followed in her car and we sat at my kitchen table, and I played her the recording. When it was finished, she looked at me for a long moment. She said, "How long have you had this?" I said, 2 months. She said, "You need an attorney." I said, "I know, I've already made the call." That was the decision. Not the Sunday in October, the Tuesday in July when Conrad looked at me from his hospital bed and said, "I want there to be a record." He had made the decision for me 2 months before I needed to use it. That was Conrad. That was the engineer who asked, what are the tolerances? What are the variables? What does the data actually support? He had given me the data. The attorney I called was a woman named Patricia Ose-Bonsu, a probate and estate litigation attorney in Huntsville, who had been recommended to me by a colleague in October, 3 weeks before the family gathering, when I had first understood that something was structurally wrong with the financial picture Conrad and I had built. I had understood it before Walter spoke. That is important. The gathering confirmed what I already suspected. The evidence I had been building for 3 months was already in a folder on my home computer by the time Walter stood up with his iced tea. Here is what I had found. In August, 6 weeks before Conrad died, I had been reviewing our joint investment accounts in preparation for the estate planning conversation that our financial advisor had recommended we have while Conrad was still able to participate. During that review, I found a transfer I did not recognize. $340,000 from our primary investment account to an account I could not access. The transfer was dated 3 weeks prior. Conrad's name was on the originating account. The destination account I could not identify from the transfer record alone. I did not ask Conrad about it immediately. He was having a difficult week, a treatment cycle that had left him exhausted and nauseated and not available for a conversation about financial transfers. I told myself I would ask when he was stronger. He did not get stronger. I did not ask. After he died, I began the estate documentation process with Patricia. The full financial picture took 6 weeks to assemble. What it showed was this. In the final 4 months of Conrad's illness, $1.1 million in joint marital assets had been transferred in 3 separate transactions to a family trust established in Conrad's name alone, with Walter Marsh as co-trustee. The trust documents had been drawn up by a Madison attorney named Gerald Suggs, who had been Walter's fraternity contact for 30 years. I had not been told about the trust. I had not been consulted about the transfers. My name was not on the trust documents. Under Alabama law, joint marital assets cannot be unilaterally transferred to a separate trust without spousal consent. There was no record of my consent because I had not given it. I brought all of this to Patricia. She looked at the transfer records and the trust documents for a long time. Then she said, "When were these transfers initiated?" I gave her the dates. The earliest was 6 weeks after Conrad's diagnosis. The latest was 4 weeks before his death. She said, "And Conrad's cognitive status?" I said, "Declining in the final 2 months." His oncologist documented reduced executive function beginning in August. Before that, he was competent and present, but under significant pressure from his parents regarding financial arrangements. She said, "I need the recording." I played her the 14 minutes. She listened without expression. When it finished, she said, He specifically addresses the trust?" I said, "At the 11-minute mark." She went back to the 11-minute mark. Conrad's voice on the recording, measured and tired and exact. "My father has been talking to me about the trust since May. I wanted on record that I was not acting freely in those conversations. I wanted on record that Vivienne should have equal access to everything we built together. I wanted on record that I trust her completely with our finances, and always have. I am saying this clearly because I know there will be a time when someone says otherwise." He had known. He had seen it coming, and he had given me the tool to answer it. Patricia said, "We're filing a fraudulent transfer claim under Alabama Code Section 8. The transfers are voidable if we can establish that they were made with intent to defraud a creditor, in this case, a spouse with equitable claims to marital assets. The recording establishes Conrad's state of mind and the coercive context. The timeline of the transfers against the medical records of his declining capacity is significant. She paused. This is buildable. I spent the next 9 months. I obtained Conrad's complete medical records from Huntsville Hospital, the oncology notes, the nursing notes, the neuropsychology assessment from August that documented the cognitive decline. I obtained the financial records for all 3 accounts involved in the transfers. Patricia subpoenaed Walter's communications with Gerald Suggs dating back to the month of Conrad's diagnosis. Those communications showed that Walter had contacted Suggs 6 days after Conrad's diagnosis to discuss estate planning options that would protect family assets. 6 days. Conrad had been diagnosed for less than a week. I organized everything into a tabbed document file. I did the organization myself, late at night, at my kitchen, because organizing data is what I do, and doing it gave me something precise to do with the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the house was quiet and large and Conrad shaped in all the wrong ways. Anita came over on Saturdays. She did not help with the legal work that was mine to do, but she sat at my kitchen table and drank coffee and was present while I worked, which is its own form of help. Once, in December, she brought a puzzle 1,000 pieces, a photograph of the Milky Way, because she said I needed to do something with my hands that was not a legal document. We did 300 pieces that afternoon and left the rest on the table for 2 weeks and finished it on a Sunday in January. I did not tell her about the nights I could not sleep. I did not tell her about the Tuesday in November when I sat on the floor of my home office with my back against Conrad's filing cabinet, the one with his bridge project files still in it, still labeled in his handwriting for 40 minutes because I could not be in the room, and could not. I sat there, and I felt the weight of the filing cabinet against my back, and I thought about Conrad saying, "What are the tolerances?" and I got up and went back to the kitchen table. For 13 months I showed up. Thanksgiving was at the Marsh family home. I drove to Madison because Conrad would have expected me to, and because I was not yet ready to establish that I was not coming back, and because Bet had called and asked in a voice that was grief and expectation braided together, and I did not have the distance yet to separate them. I sat at the same table. Walter carved the turkey with the electric knife that sounds like a small aircraft engine winding down. The sound hit me somewhere specific, and I held my face correctly and passed the sweet potatoes. Walter was cordial. He was always cordial. That is the thing about Walter. He did not behave like someone who had done something wrong because he did not believe he had done something wrong. He believed he had protected his son's legacy and his family's assets. He believed this with the conviction of a man who has spent his life calculating risk and is certain he calculated this one correctly. I watched him carve the turkey, and I thought about Conrad's voice at the 11-minute mark, and I ate my dinner. Bet pulled me aside in the kitchen after dinner. She said she hoped I knew how much Conrad had loved me. She said it with complete sincerity. I said, I knew. She said she hoped we could stay close. I said I hoped so too. I meant one of those 2 sentences. Christmas I spent in Huntsville with Anita's family. Anita's mother is a 70-year-old retired schoolteacher from Birmingham who made jollof rice and called me baby and told me grief had its own schedule and nobody else's timeline applied. I ate 3 servings of jollof rice and felt, briefly, like a person who was going to be all right. In February, there was a gathering for Conrad's birthday. He would have been 44. Walter organized it, at the Madison house, the same table. I went. I brought the sweet potato pie from a bakery in Huntsville that Conrad had loved. I put it on the table and watched Walter look at it, and then look at me with something I could not fully read. His cousin Marcus found me on the back porch near the end of the evening. He said, quietly, I want you to know I didn't believe what Walter said. In October, about Conrad's concerns, He said it carefully, aware of what he was navigating. I said I appreciated that. He said, "Conrad talked about you the way people talk about something they built together." I said I knew. He nodded and went back inside. If this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Your story matters too. The hardest moment came in April. Bet called me on a Wednesday evening. She said she wanted to give me some of Conrad's things, personal items she had been holding, some books, a jacket. She said she thought I should have them. I said thank you, and I meant it. She brought them on a Saturday. She came inside and sat at my kitchen table, and I made tea, and we talked about Conrad for 40 minutes in the way that two people who both loved the same person can talk about him when the legal situation between them is not yet visible in the room. She said, "He used to say you were the most capable person he knew." I said, "He told me that too." She said it like a gift. I received it, and I sat across from her and drank my tea and did not say anything about the 14 minutes, or the 3 transfers, or the 6 days after diagnosis when Walter had called Gerald Suggs. Not yet. The call from Patricia came on a Thursday morning in June. I was at my desk at the contractor office running a stress analysis on a component bracket when my cell buzzed. She said, "The subpoenaed communications came back from Suggs's office. I need you to come in today if you can." I went at noon. She had the emails printed and organized on her desk. Walter's correspondence with Gerald Suggs from March 2 years ago through the month Conrad died. She pointed to a chain from May, 2 months after diagnosis. Walter had written, "Conrad is not thinking clearly about the long term. Vivienne will take everything back to her family in Nigeria if something happens. We need to move on the trust before he gets worse." I read the sentence twice. Then I looked at the window behind Patricia's desk, which faced a parking garage, which had nothing particular to recommend it as a view, but I looked at it for a moment anyway. Patricia said, "This establishes intent. Combined with the recording and the medical timeline, this is the clearest fraudulent transfer case I have built in 11 years. I said, "When do we file?" She said, "I want to file by end of month. The Alabama fraudulent transfer statute has a 4-year look-back, but I want to move before the trust assets are further distributed." I said, "File." She looked at me for a moment. She said, "Vivienne, once we file, Walter will know everything you've been building." I said, "He's known what he did. Now he'll know that I know." She said, "Okay, end of month." I drove back to the office. I sat at my desk and I looked at Conrad's photograph on my monitor, the Smoky Mountains, the water bottle, the sun. I thought about him in his hospital room on that Tuesday in July, saying I want there to be a record. I thought about him knowing, from his bed, what his father was doing and not having the strength to stop it, and finding the one thing he could do and doing it. He had given me the data. I had built the structure. Now we were going to test whether it held. That evening I called Anita. I told her we were filing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll take Friday off. Come over after you file." I said, "You don't have to do that." She said, "I know." The complaint was filed in Madison County Probate Court on a Thursday in July. Fraudulent transfer under Alabama Code Section 89A, undue influence, breach of fiduciary duty. The complaint was 47 pages. Patricia had attached the recording transcript as Exhibit A. Walter was served the following Monday. Patricia told me he had called Suggs within the hour. The hearing was set for September, 14 months after Conrad died, 13 months after I had begun building the case. Patricia had requested an expedited schedule given the risk of further asset dissipation. The judge granted it. I drove to Madison County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning in September. Anita drove behind me. She was not allowed in the courtroom, but she sat in the courthouse lobby for 3 hours and was there when I came out, and that was what I needed. Walter was already in the courtroom when I arrived. He was in a dark suit, and he had the particular stillness of a man who has prepared himself for something. Bet was not there. Patricia had advised me this was possible, that Bet might not have full knowledge of the scope. I did not know if this was true. I sat down and looked at the documents in front of me. The hearing officer was a woman named Judge Carolyn Mabry, who had been on the Madison County bench for 9 years and who had the economy of someone who reads files thoroughly before anyone speaks and does not need the attorneys to tell her what she already knows. She had read the file. That was clear from her first 3 questions, precise, specific, addressed to Walter's attorney, a man named Harold Cruz who had the expression of someone who had reviewed the complaint and understood the scope of the problem he was managing. Harold Cruz made 3 arguments. Patricia answered each with a document. The recording transcript. The Walter Suggs email chain, the medical timeline, showing Conrad's declining executive function against the dates of the 3 transfers. The financial records showing the destination accounts. Conrad's signature on the trust documents against the neuropsychology assessment from August, showing reduced decisional capacity. At one point, Harold Cruz said the trust had been established according to Conrad's wishes as expressed to his father over multiple conversations. Patricia set the recording transcript open to page 11 on the table. She said, Conrad Marsh, in his own voice, 14 days before his death, states specifically that the trust conversations with his father were conducted under conditions he did not experience as free. He states specifically that his wife should have equal access to all marital assets. He states specifically that he trusts her completely. This statement was made without his parents present, recorded at his own request, and has been authenticated by 2 voice analysis experts. She paused. The plaintiff respectfully submits that Conrad's wishes, as expressed in his own words without coercion present, differ materially from the wishes as characterized by the defendant. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Mabry looked at the transcript. She looked at Walter. She said, Miss Marsh, your son made this recording. Walter looked at the table. The ruling came 6 weeks later. All 3 transfers were voided as fraudulent under Alabama Code Section 8, 9A. The $1 million in marital assets was to be returned to the marital estate for proper distribution under Alabama intestate succession law. Walter was ordered to pay Patricia's legal fees. Gerald Suggs was referred to the Alabama State Bar for a disciplinary review. I was at my desk at work when Patricia called with the ruling. I wrote down the key figures on a legal pad, the way I always write down key figures clearly. In order, with the date. Then I sat for a moment and looked at Conrad's photograph. He had given me the data. The structure had held. I walked outside the building and stood in the September Huntsville air, which was finally beginning to cool after the long Alabama summer, and I called Anita. She answered on the first ring. I said, it held. She said, I know it did. I stood outside for a few more minutes. The sky over Huntsville in September is the particular blue of a season transitioning. Not yet fall, but no longer summer. The particular blue of something becoming what it's going to be. Before I went back inside, I thought about Walter in the courthouse hallway after the ruling. I had been gathering my coat when I heard his footsteps behind me. I had known Conrad for 14 years, and I had known Walter for 11, and I knew his footsteps on a tile floor. He stopped a few feet away. I turned. He looked older than he had at Thanksgiving. Not dramatically, just the particular way that a loss, lived with for a year, settles into a face. His son was gone. That was real. The grief of that was real, and I had never disputed it. He was a man who had lost his son and had responded to that loss by trying to contain it the way he had contained every risk in his life, by controlling the variables, by managing the outcome, by deciding he knew better than the data. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. I looked at him. He was 71 years old, and frightened in the way of someone who has realized too late that the calculation was wrong. He said, very quietly, I thought I was protecting him. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Conrad in his hospital room in July. I thought about I want there to be a record. I thought about the electric knife and the cornbread and 11 years of Christmas dinners. I said, I know you did. That was all. Not forgiveness, I was not there yet, and I was not going to pretend I was. Just acknowledgement. Just, I received what you said, and I know what it is. He looked at the floor. He walked past me to the exit. The courthouse door opened and the September air came in briefly, and then the door closed. I put on my coat. I walked to where Anita was waiting. The $1 million was returned to the marital estate by November. Patricia oversaw the distribution under Alabama intestate succession, the legal framework that governs when someone dies without a will, which Conrad had not had time to complete before his death. The house on Arbor Creek Drive was mine. The investment accounts were distributed according to the succession formula. The Maine fund was intact. I did not go to Maine that year. I was not ready. I put the Maine fund in a separate account labeled the way Conrad would have labeled it clearly, with a date, with a purpose, and I let it sit there for the winter. Gerald Suggs received a formal reprimand from the Alabama State Bar and a 6-month practice suspension. The bar's finding noted that the trust documents had been prepared under circumstances that should have raised ethical concerns about undue influence and capacity. Bet called me in December. She said she had not known the full scope of what Walter had done. I do not know if this is completely true. I know it might be partially true. She said she was ashamed. She said she missed me at the table. I said I was not ready to come back to the table yet, but that I might be eventually. She said she understood. I think she did. Walter did not call. I did not expect him to. The distance between what he had done and an apology was farther than I thought he could travel, at least not yet. I held that without resolution, because some things do not resolve quickly, and pretending they do is its own kind of failure. Anita came for dinner on a Friday in January. She brought fufu and a goosey soup from a restaurant in Huntsville that her mother had approved on a visit 2 years prior, and which we had been going to ever since. We ate at my kitchen table and talked about a new project at work, a component analysis for a next-generation launch vehicle, and about a book she was reading, and about nothing in particular, which is the best kind of conversation. After dinner, she looked at my desk in the corner of the living room, the desk where I had done most of the legal work, where the tabbed document file had lived for 13 months, and she said, "What are you going to put there now?" I looked at the desk. The document file was gone. Patricia had the originals. The desk was clear except for my laptop and a coffee mug and a small sketch on a piece of graph paper that I had found in Conrad's filing cabinet in October, tucked into a folder of bridge project notes. It was a rocket. A small pencil sketch of a rocket on graph paper, labeled in Conrad's handwriting V's rocket. Not to drawn, I think, sometime in the years when he used to sit at my desk while I was working and sketch things to keep his hands busy while he thought. I did not know when he had made it. I had not known it existed until I found it in the filing cabinet. I had put it on the corner of my desk, and I had not moved it. I said, "Conrad already put something there." Anita looked at the sketch. She smiled in the particular way she smiles when something is exactly right and she does not need to say so. In March, I booked 2 weeks in Maine for July, the Pemaquid Peninsula, a rental cottage, the Atlantic, the particular cold, clean air of a place that had been waiting on my list for 4 years. I booked it alone, and I told no one except Anita, who said, "Finally, I went in July." I walked on the rocks at Pemaquid Point every morning. I ate lobster rolls from a shack in Bristol that had been there since 1987. I sat on the cottage porch in the evenings and watched the light go out of the sky over the Atlantic in the particular slow way it goes in the north in summer, unhurried, as if it has all the time in the world. On the last evening I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, and I thought about Conrad saying, what are the tolerances? What are the variables? What does the data actually support? He had asked those questions his whole life. He had asked them from his hospital bed when it mattered most. The data had supported what I knew to be true. The structure had held. I used to think that trust was unconditional, that you gave it fully to the people you loved, and you did not audit it or qualify it, or protect yourself against its failure. I built my marriage on that belief. I built my relationship with Conrad's family on it. I do not think that anymore. Not exactly. I think trust is structural. Like everything else that has to hold underload a bridge, a spacecraft component. A marriage, it requires accurate assessment of the conditions it will face. It requires knowing where the stress points are. It requires maintenance and inspection, and the willingness to see what the data actually shows rather than what you hope it shows. Conrad knew this. He saw the failure coming from his hospital bed, and he gave me the instrument to answer it. 14 minutes on a voice memo app. What are the tolerances? What are the variables? What does the data actually support? There is a sketch on the corner of my desk. A rocket on graph paper, penciled in Conrad's handwriting, labeled with my name in the casual possessive of someone who made something for you without announcement. Not to scale. He was always precise about the things that required precision, and loose about the things that did not. I look at it every morning before I start work. It does not answer the questions that do not have answers: why he died at 43, what we would have built in the years after, Maine in the summer, all of it. It does not answer those. It is just accurate. It is just his hand on paper, making something for me, sometime in the years when we were building a life together and did not know yet how it would be tested. I have been tested. The structure held. That is what I know. I used to think that grief was the thing you got through in order to get back to normal. I now think grief is the territory. You do not pass through it. You learn to do the work inside it, the legal work, the technical work, the daily work of a life that has been changed and must be lived accurately anyway. That is my story. An aerospace engineer who spent 13 months building the case her dead husband's trust deserved, and who learned that the strongest structures are the ones built on accurate data, even when the data is painful. If this reminded you that honoring someone you loved means protecting what they meant to give you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.